Hey, Mike here. I just wanted to let you know that you can listen to Dark Poutine early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime.
Woman of the Hour is the stranger-than-fiction story of an aspiring actress in 1970s Los Angeles whose life intersects with a serial killer in the midst of a years-long murder spree when she's cast on an episode of The Dating Game, based on a true story and directed by Academy Award nominee Anna Kendrick. Watch Woman of the Hour, only on Netflix, October 18, rated R.
¿Hablas español?
Sprichst du Deutsch?
Kan du norsk?
If you've heard that sound from Babbel before, I bet you do. Babbel is the science-backed language learning app that actually works. With quick 10-minute lessons handcrafted by over 200 language experts, Babbel gets you on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. With over 16 million subscriptions sold and a 20-day money-back guarantee, just start speaking another language with Babbel. Right now, up to 55% off your Babbel subscription at babbel.com/Spotify podcast. Spelled BABBEL.com/Spotify podcast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Are we live? Are we live?
We're live. The loons indicate that we're live. It is another episode of Dark Poutine. Matthew, you wrote this one.
I did.
Do you have anything to say about it?
Yeah, I hope everyone likes the prose.
Yeah.
Obviously, I wrote this one because it's, a little bit, it feels a little bit personal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. And we'll get into why as we go.
The views, information, and opinions expressed during the Dark Poutine podcast are solely those of the producer and do not necessarily represent those of Curious Cast, its affiliate, Global News, nor their parent company, Chorus Entertainment.
Dark Poutine is not for the faint of heart or squeamish. Listener discretion is strongly advised. We're not experts on the topics we present, nor are we journalists. We're two ordinary Canadian schmucks chatting about crime and the dark side of history. Let's get to it. Put on your toque, grab yourself a double-double and a Nanaimo bar. It's time to scarf down some Dark Poutine.
You are responsible for obtaining and maintaining at your own cost all equipment needed to listen to Dark Poutine. Dark Poutine can be addictive. Side effects may include, but not be limited to, pausing and questioning the system, elevated heart rate, pondering humanity, odd looks from colleagues as you laugh out loud at work, family members not into true crime worrying about you. Positive side effects may include some perspectives and opinions that you disagree with, as well as some wokeness and empathy. If you don't think Dark Poutine is for you, consult your doctor immediately.
On the night of September 6th, 1958, Aaron Bud Jenkins was stabbed to death as he slept in his barracks at the Naval base in Esquimalt on Vancouver Island here in BC. A man named Leo Mantha confessed to the crime. He was tried, found guilty of first-degree murder, and executed in 1959. He was the last person to ever be executed in British Columbia and the third to last executed in Canada. At the time, executions were rare and most Canadian death penalty verdicts were commuted to life in prison. After revisiting the crime, the consensus among experts today is that anyone else would have been charged with manslaughter or second-degree murder and not first-degree murder. So why did Leo Mantha hang? The fact that Leo was gay was the only factor that made him stand out at the time of the crime. Was his a hanging by homophobia? This is Dark Poutine, episode 339, BC's Last Man Hanged, the tale of Leo Mantha. Capital punishment in Canada has a dark history rooted in the early days under British rule. From Confederation in 1867 until the death penalty for murder was scrapped on July 26, 1976, 1,481 people faced a noose. Of those, 710 were executed, 697 men and 13 women. Hanging was the grim method of choice, used exclusively for civilian executions. The last time it was employed was on December 11, 1962, when Arthur Lucas and Ronald Turpin met their fate at Toronto's Don Jail. The end of capital punishment wasn't sudden, but a gradual process. Officially, the death penalty stopped being used in January 1963, but remained on the books for a while. Before 1976, murder, treason, and piracy were punishable by death under the Criminal Code, as were certain military offenses under the National Defense Act, although the last military execution was in 1946. Parliament made a significant move in 1976 with Bill C-48 ending the death penalty for murder, treason, and piracy. By 1999, the death penalty was entirely removed from Canadian law, including for military offenses, marking the end of an era for capital punishment in Canada. Matthew and I both have shared in previous episodes that we aren't supporters of the death penalty. So why do folks like us oppose the death penalty? For many of us, it's about deep-rooted moral, philosophical, and/or religious convictions. It all comes down to respecting life even in the worst situations. Some argue that executing someone upholds the value of life, but many of us ask, how does killing one person teach us that killing someone else is wrong? Opponents see it as a blatant violation of the fundamental right to life. Supporters might argue that murder justifies removing all rights, but human rights aren't granted by governments and they can't be taken away by them. They either belong to everyone or to no one. Opponents say that executions are premeditated acts by the state, and considering the agony and mental torment of awaiting death, they're nothing short of cruel. We'd call it torture under any other circumstances, wouldn't we? Those against the death penalty generally want all forms of torture abolished, no exceptions.
Yeah, and Mike, through Dark Poutine, I've met people who have lost loved ones because their loved ones were murdered.
Mm-hmm.
And, some of these people have expressed to me that they were anti-death penalty before this happened,
right?
But are now for it. And I've tried to put myself into their shoes, and I can understand where they're coming from. But my anti-death penalty stance, doesn't negate their feelings. Like
right.
I respect their feelings completely. But, I think that perhaps if we didn't have such an obviously flawed system where killers are getting parole so early, and that if we felt that justice was actually being served, the call for reinstatement of the death penalty would probably be lessened a little bit. And, I feel that the victims of these crimes, of the families are not being treated fairly.
Yeah.
And things need to change. But for me, the change isn't putting the death penalty in. I think there's so many more options where we could go for people to feel like justice being served than getting into a culture of vengeance. And I don't think it's right nor practical when you take the emotion out of it.
Yeah. And to point out the elephant in the living room, or more like the dog snoring in Matthew's studio, Steve's having a little sleep. He's not well. He's on some medications. So if you hear a weird noise during the episode, that's poor Steve snoring. Moving on. On the practical side, the death penalty doesn't hold up when it comes to justice and effectiveness. Supporters claim it deters crime, either by scaring people away or preventing repeat offenses. But killers aren't usually thinking rationally, though some are, as we've seen in some of our previous episodes. They act in the heat of the moment or under the influence. Studies show the death penalty isn't an effective deterrent. Since Canada abolished it in 1975, the homicide rate dropped, not soared. And in the U.S., states with the death penalty often have higher homicide rates than those without. Strange. Then there's the belief that the death penalty ensures the person will never kill again, yet those convicted of murder reoffend less than you'd think. From a paper written by the John Howard Society of Toronto back in 2001, in the U.S., only 0.31% of paroled murderers were convicted of another homicide. Similar stats are seen in Europe and Canada. This is about half of the 0.06% of the general population who kill. So in reality, you have double the chance of being killed by someone who hasn't gone to jail for murder than someone who has. I'm not sure about Matthew's math here, but whatever. The growing evidence of flaws in the justice system has turned many against the death penalty. Wrongful convictions are a serious issue. In the U.S., 353 wrongful death penalty convictions were identified, with 25 executed. In Illinois, 13 death row inmates were exonerated due to DNA evidence or retrials. A study found that 68% of death penalty appeals resulted in overturned convictions due to unreliable evidence or procedural errors. Again, from the John Howard Society paper, The Death Penalty, Any Nation's Shame. Without the death penalty, wrongful convictions can be rectified, but once someone is executed, there's no going back. If you're dead, you're dead, whether or not you're proved innocent later. With the death penalty, there's no take-backsies.
Yeah, and imagine if we had the death penalty in Canada. We as voting citizens of this country would have been implicit in the state-sanctioned murders of people like David Milgaard, Guy Paul Morin, Donald Marshall Jr., Thomas Sofenow, and Stephen Truscott, for example.
Yep.
All of whom were convicted of murder in jail, but who were later found to be innocent. And I don't know about you, Mike, but I don't want their blood on my hands.
No, absolutely not. And as a democracy, we have a say. And with that say comes responsibility.
Yeah.
Some proponents of the death penalty say that killing people is cheaper than paying for their time in jail. A lot of research shows that this is a flawed belief. From the Equal Justice USA website article, Wasteful and Inefficient, the Alarming Costs of the Death Penalty, quote, most costs associated with the death penalty never appear as line items in any budget. Instead, they are buried in a thicket of legal proceedings and hours spent by judges, clerks, prosecutors, and other agencies. In the time it takes to pursue just one capital case, law enforcement could investigate, solve, prosecute, and prevent scores of other crimes. More than a dozen states have found that death penalty cases are up to 10 times more expensive than comparable non-death penalty cases. End quote.
The dark reality is that justice is capricious and has proven time and time and time again over history and around the world to be both, it's systematically racist, it's classist, it's homophobic. The death penalty tends to be meted out more to those who are poor and to minorities, right? And to those who that the majority or those in powers deem lesser than. And that's the problem.
Yes, it definitely is. Mm-hmm.
Like if you start to look into this, it's absolutely clear that that's what happens.
Yeah, it's as though there are certain parts of society that are more worthy of life than others, according to this.
Yeah, and all you have to do is look. It's all right there.
In the USA, not because it's particularly or necessarily worse than other countries, but because it has a large population, the death penalty, and data to support findings, a lot of the numbers do support that there are racial biases in death penalty cases. From the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers website article Race in the Death Penalty, December 7, 2022. The article starts with a quote from a Supreme Court justice named Harry Blackburn in 1994 that says, quote, even under the most sophisticated death penalty statutes, race continues to play a major role in determining who shall live and who shall die. Perhaps it should not be surprising that the biases and prejudices that infect society generally would influence the determination of who is sentenced to death. End quote. The article goes on to provide some chilling statistics. Black and Hispanic people represent 31% of the U.S. population, but 53% of death row inmates, 41% and 11% respectively. The death row population is over 41% black, even though black people make up about 13% of the U.S. population. A study on 600 death-eligible cases from Philadelphia between 1979 and 1999 found that in cases involving a white victim, the more stereotypically black a defendant is perceived to be, the more likely that person is to be sentenced to death.
Yeah, and in Canada, Mike, we don't have direct statistics like this because the death penalty was abolished so long ago.
76,
and before good data was really kept. But we can take some educated guesses on what would happen if we did have the death penalty by looking at those numbers.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, our numbers tend to mirror the United States in a few ways. You would think probably Indigenous people would figure high on a Canadian list.
Mm-hmm.
According to the Government of Canada's Justice website, from 2007 to 2008 and 2015 to 2016, Black Canadians accused of a crime were, on average, 36% more likely than white Canadians to receive a custodial term of 2 years or more. And of course, Indigenous Canadians get the short end of the stick, as always. From the Statista website article, Aboriginal Crime and Justice in Canada, Statistics and Facts, quote, Aboriginal offenders are more likely to be sentenced to custody rather than community-based options such as probation, and in custody are more likely to serve a larger portion of their sentence before being released on their first parole. On average, they have served 3% more of their sentence than non-Aboriginal offenders over the last decade. Aboriginal offenders are also more likely to be classified as a higher risk while incarcerated than non-Aboriginal inmates, with 85% of Aboriginal offenders classified as medium or maximum risk, compared to 78.3% of non-Aboriginal offenders. End quote. And I don't like that word Aboriginal. This is probably an older article, but, whatever.
That's the article.
Yeah, that's the article.
And with those stats, it's hard for anyone not to assume that if we had the death penalty in Canada, we'd have more Black and Indigenous Canadians being executed, where whites would get lesser sentences and their sentences would be commuted like in the US. You can hope for the best, but
right.
I don't know. I just don't trust us.
Well, there is a bit of history, and we'll get into that next.
Yeah.
Canadian history is rife with judicial and extrajudicial killings of minorities that we now know were fully or at least partially race-motivated and highly problematic. To name a few of the most well-known cases, we have to mention the lynching of Peter Wheeler, a Black Nova Scotian, in 1896. We covered his story in episode 211. There was the execution of Wallace Johnson, a Black Ontarian, in 1901. Also, the story we covered in episode 216 was that of the execution of Marie Joseph Angelique, an enslaved Black woman. Perhaps the most widely known, there's also the sad story of now national hero, the Métis Louis Riel, who was executed in 1885. When it comes to people from sexual minorities, the stats are less clear but directional. From the Government of Canada's website, Serious legal problems faced by lesbian, gay, bisexual, and other sexual minority people in Western Canada, a qualitative study, quote, sexual minority people may also be overrepresented in the prison system as offenders. Data from the United States has shown disproportionate rates of incarceration among sexual minority people, and while comparable Canadian data is sparse, the existing data indicates that sexual and gender minority people may also face disproportionate incarceration rates. End quote. In British Columbia, we can look back at a dark chapter in our history that points to how systemic homophobia can result in miscarriages of justice. The last execution in the province, 65 years ago. It happened on April 28, 1959. This was at a time when the death penalty was decidedly on its way out in Canada. Most people convicted of first-degree murder had their sentences reduced to life in prison, but not in this instance. Most cases of this nature would have resulted in a second-degree murder conviction and might have been considered a crime of passion. Not in this instance. Why? Because the perpetrator, Leo Mantha, and the victim, Bud Jenkins, were a gay couple. At the time when Mantha and Jenkins were in a relationship, being gay was considered a psychological disorder and was in itself a crime in Canada, punishable by jail time and flogging. This was based on the Gross Indecency Act implemented in 1868. Before that, just being gay was punishable by death.
Yeah, and for those who say Mantha's punishment had nothing to do with his being gay, well, you need to consider the environment at the time and the facts of the case.
Yep.
The decriminalization, Mike, of homosexuality didn't incur till a decade after this case in 1969.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
There isn't much written about the first victim in this tragic and often overlooked case, the man who Leo Mantha ultimately killed, Aaron Bud Jenkins. At the time of his untimely death, Bud was just 23 years old. He was living in the barracks at the Naval base in Esquimalt on Vancouver Island, far from home yet serving his country. Bud was the youngest of 6 children born into a staunch Anglican family. The police documents that detail his life are, sadly, sparse and clinical, almost as if they didn't think this young man was worth more than a few lines on paper. They describe him simply as homosexual, feminine type, as if that was all there was to say about a person who had a life, a family, and a future cut short in a senseless act. Leo Mantha was born on December 22, 1926. He grew up in Verdun, a working-class suburb of Montreal. His family was devoutly Roman Catholic and he was an altar boy. But he knew he was different. His life was marked by turbulence from an early age. When he was 12, he found out that the woman who he had been told was his older sister was his mother, and the woman he knew as his mother was his grandmother. He left school at grade 8 and started working in a munitions plant until the Second World War ended. He then worked for the Canadian National Railway as an office junior, and then at the railway's huge brick repairs yard in Point St. Charles, a tough industrial neighborhood. Mantha later confided to a prison psychologist that his first sexual experience was at the age of 16, with an older boy who later became a priest. This memory surely added to his inner turmoil. Raised in a strict Roman Catholic household, Mantha struggled with his sexuality from a young age, a struggle that would shape much of his life. He joined the Navy in 1951, seeking some structure or escape, but his military career was short-lived. In 1956, a military psychiatrist diagnosed him with a personality disorder with alcohol and sexual deviation and deemed him unfit for duty, recommending psychiatric treatment in Montreal. The psychologist's report paints a picture of a man at constant war with himself, battling demons both internal and external. The psychologist wrote, quote, "He gives a long history of extreme conflict over homosexual tendencies, which he recognizes as socially unacceptable and feels very shameful. So long as he does not drink, he can control them, although they still make themselves felt from time to time. Obviously, the service is the last place in the world for a man with this sort of conflict." End quote. A few years later, Mantha found himself on Vancouver Island, having drifted across the country to work as a marine engineer for a tugboat operator. It was during this time that Mantha and Bud first crossed paths in the spring of 1958. Mantha was living at 451 Superior Street in Victoria's James Bay neighborhood, sharing an apartment with Bud's cousin Don Perry. Just 4 short months passed between Mantha and Bud's initial meeting and the day that would end in Bud's killing. Some say Mantha's trial was the beginning of a government-sponsored gay purge, not just in BC but right across Canada. More after a quick break.
Imagine what's possible when learning doesn't get in the way of life. At Capella University, our game-changing FlexPath learning format lets you set your own deadlines so you can learn at a time and pace that works for you. It's an education you can tailor to your schedule. That means you don't have to put your life on hold to pursue your professional goals. Instead, enjoy learning your way and earn your degree without missing a beat. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
Curious about lip filler? Whether you want a subtle pout or bold plump, Juvederm lip fillers can give you a customized lip look. Juvederm Volbella XC and Juvederm Ultra XC can last up to a full year with optimal treatment, giving your lips added volume for smooth, natural-looking and long-lasting results. Whether you're concerned about your thin lips or simply want fuller lips, ask about Juvederm lip fillers at your next appointment with your licensed specialist. And download the Ally app, that's ALLE, the official loyalty program of Juvederm, to save on treatments. For important safety information and to find a licensed specialist, visit Juvederm.com. That's JUVEDERM.com. Not for people with severe allergic reactions, allergies to lidocaine, or the proteins used in Juvederm. Common side effects include injection site redness, swelling, pain, tenderness, firmness, lumps, bumps, bruising, discoloration, or itching. There's a risk of unintentional injection into a blood vessel, which can cause vision abnormalities, blindness, stroke, temporary scabs, or scarring. Talk to a licensed specialist to find out if it's right for you.
And we're back. Matthew, thoughts so far? I mean, you wrote the script, but still, you have some thoughts on it for sure.
Yeah. It just feels personal, right? Because don't get me wrong. He did wrong, right? And he did kill his partner, his boyfriend, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
But really, this is the study of how justice is meted out differently if you're a minority.
Yeah.
Right. And the nuances of justice. So. This is important to me because this is part of the history of, quote, my people in Canada, right?
During their relatively short relationship, Mantha was often away working on a tugboat up and down the coastline through the rivers of BC, though he wrote letters to Bud often, letters that were found and later used as exhibits at the trial.
Yeah, and when you read the letters, he seems to really have overcome his internal struggles with being gay.
Mm-hmm.
And he wrote lovingly to Bud, and I think it's obvious that he considers himself to be in a important relationship with Bud. And I think that perhaps his newfound freedom of being away from his family and away from the military and sort of in a new, more open environment made him perhaps think he needed to make up for lost time.
Sure.
Now, I've bumped into people and I've known people who recently came out throughout my life. And I have seen sort of this action of feeling like they were making up for lost time and jumping into relationships faster than they need to because it's all brand spanking new, right? So you can't blame him for that. But I think, I feel he's a little bit over the top in how serious he thought the relationship was at that time.
There you go. Bud didn't share the same view of their relationship. One particular letter made it clear to him that he needed to break up with Mantha. The letter, exhibit number 23 from the case, is dated Tuesday, August 12, 1958, New Westminster, 4 p.m. It reads, quote, Dearest Budsy Wudsy, hello, you Nelly old thing. Just a few quick lines before we arrive at NW. Didn't get back to Victoria after all. Our next job was a trip to Campbell River with a chip scow. Now we're bringing 2 empty ones from there to NW. He means New Westminster. Don't know what our next job is as yet. I painted my Nelly old cabin out, green plus white. My old school colors. I used the spare bunk over the deckhands one. End quote. The letter goes on. We can't make out some of the handwriting. To end with, quote, Well, darling, I hope you are behaving yourself. Also same for Jerry and Dawn. I miss you terribly. Hope you do likewise. Maybe we'll be down in Victoria soon. I hope. Bye for now. Much love and kisses. Leo. End quote. From Extra Magazine, in an article titled Mantha's Last Gasp, How Homophobia Fueled BC's Final Execution 55 Years Ago, written by Nathaniel Christopher, dated May 7, 2013. The article indicated it was clear that Bud felt differently about the relationship and that Mantha's overly affectionate letter was a turnoff. The article quotes friend Stan Piontek as saying, quote, I was with Bud when he opened that letter. He seemed sort of upset because everyone did their own thing and cruised their own way, end quote. Piontek also recalled the casual nature of relationships and of Bud and Mantha's, because let's face it, if it was illegal to be gay, then not a lot of effort would be put into setting up home with a white picket fence together at the time. Quote, Piontek says the men got together for drinks at each other's homes or in pubs and for sex. Everyone went their own way, he recalls. Some guys would go to Beacon Hill Park and go along the bottom and do some sunbathing down there. But other than that, everyone kept to themselves pretty well. Bud and Leo just hung out with each other, he says. They didn't hang out anywhere in particular, maybe coffee or at a house, end quote. The letter was the beginning of the end of the relationship, and after Mantha returned in August, the relationship began to unravel, which culminated in a drunken Mantha assaulting Bud on September 5th. On that day, Bud told Mantha that he wanted to end their relationship as he wanted to marry a female friend. This was a very common practice back in these days when it was illegal to be gay. Sometimes the women knew and were either lesbians or just helping out. Other times, the gay man was trying, against his nature, to fit into a heterosexual society. The rejection caused Mantha to punch Leo 2 times hard in the face. From the Extra article, Piontek met his friend soon after. Quote, "I met him on the causeway, and he was sobbing and there was some blood on his eye." End quote. Piontek then took Bud to his cousin Perry, who worked in a cocktail bar in the Empress Hotel, the Coronet Lounge, which later became the famous Bengal Lounge, as a waiter. His cousin, concerned, told him that he should wash the blood off his face and go back to the safety of his naval base. Quote, "His uniform was at 451 Superior Street, and I went back with him there, and while he was getting changed, we were talking, telling me how he was beaten up and everything else," Piontek says. "It turns out that Mantha had been in the next room to us, and he would have heard everything." End quote. Bud got a ride back to the barracks after this conversation. Court documents show Mantha's side of what happened that night.
Of course, we have to take this with a grain of salt, right?
Yeah.
Like it's whenever a killer is speaking, you have to question exactly what they're saying, because are they trying to get out of it and the other person can't say anything?
Of course, it's human nature to want to mitigate the consequences that you're about to receive.
Yeah.
So absolutely, if one of the parties is dead and the other party is accused of killing them, you absolutely have to take what they say with a grain of salt. No question. No question. I was thinking about this the other day because I was reading this script, and how, we've talked about a number of cases like this where the killer is the only person left. And I was thinking about Daniel Levesque, and Stacey Thurr's mom was on the show, and how Daniel's story, his last moments, were told by his killer, and I always struggle with that. It's like, and that becomes because, okay, this guy is saying he's at least willing to talk about it, so they take it as the official version, and it becomes the official version of events, even though it's this guy who is the offender, the perpetrator of the event, because without his admission, they may not convict him.
Yeah, and that's how that's why investigation is so important.
Yeah,
to try to trip them up on actual truth, even if they're admitting it. It's I think it's important in some ways to try to figure out how you can disprove, even if they've admitted it, disprove some of the facts on what they say led up to it or what they did.
Sure.
Right? Because I think the person who's been murdered, we kind of owe that to them as much as we can. Like, in the end, we want to throw the book at them and throw them in jail. But in order, if we can sort of uphold the rights of the dead person in terms of what was said or not said or done or not done, I think that's important as well.
Here's a bit of Leo Mantha's testimony, quote, "I was drinking that day and night, all that day, at the apartment. We drank a bottle of whiskey from 8 to 11 that evening, and beer. We watched TV and argued." He went on to say, "I saw that he was just playing me for a fool, and he got me so riled up. He had started insulting me, said I was just a sucker, that he was just taking me for everything I had. We used to go out a lot, and I would usually foot the bill. Well, he was trying to tell me that he was no longer interested in me. Well, I decided over this fight that our friendship had come to an end, which hurt me very much," Mantha told the court. "And I was just disgusted with what had happened and couldn't see much in the future, so I was contemplating packing it all in." "What do you mean by packing it all in?" asked defense lawyer Liberal MLA George Gregory. "Well, I figured I could drive up the Island Highway over the Malahat and give her the gas and just let her go, and I would go over the cliff there." Instead of killing himself while driving on the highway, Mantha, in a drunken stupor, instead decided to break into the naval base to try to salvage the relationship. Quote, "Well, I was hoping if I saw Bud and could speak to him and try to patch things up, then I would not have to do what I was going to do," he testified. After breaking into the barracks and finding Bud amongst the sleeping men, he said, quote, "I stood beside the bed and Jenkins was laying on his back. I think I bent down or reached down. I was going to ask him, and just at that moment he turned and moved," Mantha told the court. "I think that startled me, and the next thing I recall is his screams, and I got panicky, and I ran out of the place. He started to scream, and I ran away and out the same way I came in," end quote. The reason Bud was screaming, which Mantha didn't tell the court, was that he had stabbed him twice with a 23-centimeter hunting knife. Ugh.
Yeah, I'd be screaming too. And the fact is, we haven't got to the end of this yet, but he did it, right? But that's why we're telling the story. And I think what's important is, why I wrote this. I wanted to show how the justice system is meted out differently and can be for minorities. Yeah. I'm not saying, he should have got off scot-free. It's really important for me to underline that, right?
Right.
But he should have been commuted to life in prison.
So you feel that the punishment didn't fit the crime in this case?
Especially at the time when almost all death penalties were commuted.
Yeah. Eyewitnesses said that Bud screamed while bleeding from the nose and mouth, "Help me! Oh God, help me!" as he staggered toward the door of the barracks before he collapsed in the hallway and died. Leo Mantha had quickly left, unseen by others, and returned home where he found Don Perry, Bud's cousin, who had returned from work at the cocktail bar. Perry's testimony describes the conversation that happened before he called the police. Perry, not knowing that his cousin was dead and still shook by the fact that Mantha had punched Bud, said to him that he couldn't, quote, keep a friend by being possessive or by beating them. Perry noticed blood on Mantha's fingernails. Mantha said, quote, "I'm in more trouble than you think." Perry replied, "What could be more serious than to beat your friend?" Mantha then admitted that he went to the barracks and had attacked Bud again, more seriously. "How could you attack him more seriously than you had already done?" Perry asked. "I don't mean I attacked him with my hands. I stabbed him with a knife." Perry then exclaimed, "My God, Leo, how could you do that to Bud?" It seems that Mantha then waited at the apartment while Perry called the police, who soon arrived, and within minutes, he confessed.
Well, you and I have talked about this before. It just must be exhausting running and hiding after you've done something like this. And yeah. I think maybe at this point he just needed it to be over.
Yeah, perhaps.
Yeah.
The trial took place over 9 days with Justice John Rattan presiding. The Crown prosecutor was Lloyd Mackenzie, and Mantha's defense lawyer was George Gregory. Gregory took pains to paint a picture of what the case was, a crime of passion, fueled by excessive drinking. He explained to the jury that no man in his right mind would break into a barracks with the intent to murder, and he reminded them that Mantha was, quote, charged with murder, not with being a homosexual, end quote. Gregory also indicated that if Leo were found guilty because he was a homosexual and, quote, the world would be better off without Mantha, then the same thinking would apply to the victim, Bud Jenkins, end quote. Throughout the trial, during the proceedings, Crown Prosecutor Lloyd Mackenzie consistently referenced Mantha's homosexuality and brought in, quote, expert psychiatrist Douglas Alcorn from the Extra article by Nathaniel Christopher, quote, "Throughout the trial, Mantha's sexual orientation was described as a problem that exacerbated his brittle and explosive personality. Victoria psychiatrist Douglas Alcorn told the court that the passions ignited by rejection on the part of homosexuals were more intense than for heterosexuals. The homosexual is under peculiar stresses and peculiar strains which, frankly, manifests itself in outbursts of rage, panic, fear, beyond that which one would normally expect, and in a particular fashion in a heterosexual individual," Alcorn said. In other words, It has been long recognized that the homosexual is peculiarly prone to such outbursts. In his charge to the jury, Justice John Rattan advised jurors that they were dealing with an abnormal person. Quote, "Certainly, I think the accused was provoked, and that is why the fight started," Rattan said. "But do you consider a normal person could be provoked in a similar manner?" End quote.
Yeah, and it's honestly, this is a while ago, but it's not that long ago that I'm sure statements of abnormality of a gay person have been heard in court. Right? Probably more recent than we care to admit.
I've told this story before. I used to serve coffee to a guy in my hometown, and he was murdered by a guy who claimed that in the last few moments of this guy's life, he had made a pass at this guy after they smoked a joint together. And this fellow, who I used to play hockey with, so I knew both the accused and the murdered. This guy said, well, he made a pass at me, and so I stabbed him.
Oh, the good old gay panic defense.
Yep. Yeah, the guy was still convicted of second-degree murder, but, you know, we hear it so many times. We've heard it so many times.
If a gay guy makes a pass at you and you're straight, A, be flattered, B, say no thanks.
Yeah, unless you're open to trying things. I mean, you know, but I was reading an article, again, doing some research for this case, my own research, because I appreciate what you've done, but it was talking about how homophobic men actually become excited.
I saw that recent article.
Yeah.
Actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, you know, if you're solid in yourself and who you are, like, who gives a crap if somebody else is gay?
Yeah.
You know, I think it's a little bit of, you know, there's something about that guy that I don't like about myself.
Right. Perhaps it's something worth investigating. The all-male jury, probably all straight male, deliberated for just 3 hours before coming back with a first-degree murder verdict, a verdict that they knew carried a mandatory death sentence. The judge then said, quote, "Leo Anthony Mantha, the sentence of this court upon you is that you should be taken hence to the prison from whence you came, and there kept in close confinement until Tuesday the 19th of March, next A.D. 1959, when you shall be taken to the place of execution, where you shall be hanged by the neck until you are dead, and may the Lord have mercy upon your soul." End quote. Mantha was led away before Judge Rattan realized March 19th was a Thursday, not a Tuesday, and hauled him back into the courtroom and, without apology, told him that he had 2 days less to live and that he'd be hanged on March 17th, a Tuesday. Mantha's lawyer appealed the verdict with the BC Court of Appeal on the grounds that the judge had misdirected the jury. The appeal was unanimously dismissed. The case was brought to the federal cabinet, the people who had the final say in all capital punishment cases. John Diefenbaker was the prime minister and known to oppose capital punishment. Mantha's attorney tried to leverage contacts that he had to have the death sentence commuted, and many others, including Don Perry, requested clemency. Cabinet not only refused clemency, but the cabinet does clearly indicate that what they refer to as the homosexual problem was a driving force in their decision. Part of the note reads, quote, "His brittle and explosive personality was caused in part by his early home life and his homosexual problem. From the evidence, it would appear that the crime was motivated by Mantha's anger at the decision of the victim to break off their relationship." End quote.
You know, and I think this, you know, we should all feel as Canadians, not shame, but maybe, I don't know, maybe anger, maybe disappointment that this is not who we should be as a society, and these are not leaders in power that we should have in even back then.
Yeah.
Right. It's I find this a stain on our history.
Leo Mantha was hanged at Ocala Prison Farm just after midnight on April 28, 1959, the last person to ever be executed in British Columbia. But that's not the end of this story. Almost before Leo Mantha's body was cold, the federal government, which had already been trying to root gays out of the military, leveraged the case to stir up homophobic sentiment and started up a massive multi-year witch hunt and purging of gays, not just from the military, but from the police, government, education, and the civil service. This is a big story to tell, and Matthew is going to tackle it in another episode of Dark Poutine. Decades later, both the presiding judge and the Crown prosecutor admitted that the fact that Leo Mantha was gay was the main reason as to why he was executed. In a 1996 Saturday Night Magazine article, Justice Rattan said that he believed many other scoundrels deserved death far more than Mantha, but, quote, but they were not homosexuals, and their sentences were all commuted, end quote. In a 1999 interview in the Vancouver Courier, Lloyd Mackenzie, Crown prosecutor on Mantha's case, said, quote, he had a very heavy load to carry in defending himself in this case because he was a homosexual. There's no doubt about it. That was a strong factor mitigating against him, end quote. Before we end today's episode, we want to take you back to the gallows where Leo Mantha was executed. A female journalist from the Vancouver province named Jean Howarth was in attendance. From her article titled Mantha Dies on the Gallows, published 29th April 1959.
Yeah, and this really hit me when I first read it, so let's read it all right now.
Quote, I went to see Leo Mantha hang because I do not believe in capital punishment. It was my idea that I go. A man had been assigned to the job, and the managing editor did not want to let a woman go. None of my superiors did. It made them uncomfortable. I went to New Westminster myself to ask for permission of Sheriff Frank Cotton. When I told him what I wanted, he said at once, no, I couldn't. Then he added, I'm not trying to deny you, just protect you. But he agreed to listen to me. I told him why I wanted to go, that a hanging was the responsibility of all Canadians, and I did not think we should do in dark corners what we could not face in the light. That I would not be writing it hysterically or dramatically, but with as much sober truth as I could muster. After a while, he said, will you sit out in the other office and let me think for a while? I sat in the outer office for 21 minutes. Then he opened the door and beckoned me in. He was looking gray and unhappy. I've decided to let you go, he said.
And that's strong, isn't it? It's
yeah.
You know, like Ms. Howarth, you know, you and I believe that the dark moments of our shared history are the responsibility of all Canadians.
Yeah.
And that we shouldn't hide the truth in the dark corners of our history, and that these truths have to be brought into the light before we can reconcile our past with our present, right? And like her, you know, I think this show, we try to provide these facts with as much sober truth as we can muster.
So if you want to read Ms. Howarth's full article, you can find it in the episode links, and we found it on Nathaniel Christopher's website, a former journalist whose articles and website, nathaniel.ca, were a great source of information. Thank you. He is one of the few journalists out there to cover this story. And interestingly, you know, it's one of those stories that, why aren't we talking about this one a little more? Because, yeah.
It's big. It's a big story. Right?
Yeah. And that's it for Dark Poutine episode 339, BC's Last Man Hanged, the tale of Leo Mantha.
This episode is brought to you by Lifetime. Imagine a mother so consumed by love, she's driven to the extreme. In this Lifetime original movie, an overbearing mother's quest to save her daughter's innocence takes a sinister turn, from bribery to murder for hire. This is a story of obsession and dark family loyalty. Inspired by true events, watch Nobody Dumps My Daughter, premiering tonight at 8. Part of truly unbelievable movies, only on Lifetime.
Discover Canada's most compelling true crime stories with True North True Crime.
Join hosts Caitlin and Graham as they delve into gripping cases of murder and disappearance.
My brother was such a huge light in everyone's life that he touched.
Through in-depth research and exclusive family interviews, uncover the truth behind the headlines.
I will never stop until I find out the truth. Until I'm 6 feet in the ground, I will never, ever stop.
True North True Crime is available right now wherever you listen to podcasts.
The leaves drift to the ground, the wind rises. Pull up a chair by our fire and listen to stories from the darker side of the past. I'm Maddie.
And I'm Anthony, and on our podcast, After Dark Myths, Misdeeds and the Paranormal, we tell stories of villages and the death of queens.
Of Tudor ghosts that will not sleep, and of murder among gravestones.
For spine-tingling history from the darker side of the past, listen to After Dark from History Hit, wherever you get your podcasts.
That's right. It's time for voicemails. You can leave us a message at 1-877-327-5786 or 1-877-DARK-PTN. We'd love to hear from you. Let's see who called us this week. Here's our first voicemail.
Hey guys, this is Terry on my way down to Aberdeen, Washington with my good buddy Freddie here. Let you guys tell us what that famous son's name is from Aberdeen. Anyway, boys, been listening to your show for the last, not quite a year, been binge watching it. Love it. Absolutely love it. You guys bring a smile to my face every day. And Freddie and I, we're not sending you any fucking donut money. We're going to send you. You guys are going to have to eat some of Steve's dog treats, man. All right. Take a shit in your hat. Love you guys. Bye.
Well, I appreciate that. Aberdeen, home of Kurt Cobain.
Is that the case?
Absolutely it is. Absolutely it is.
Terry and Freddie.
Yeah, thanks, Terry and Freddie. And
I think they're Aberdeen Angus cattle farmers.
Oh, there you go. Aberdeen Angus cattle farmers.
You know, those big old cattle.
Those big old cattle.
And they have a big, they're hauling a big truck filled with the cattle down to Aberdeen.
Well, there you go. Someone's got to do it, Matthew. And now I want a burger.
I want a steak.
A steak. Oh, a steak. Yeah, that would be really good. All right. Here's our second voicemail.
Hi, fellas. It's Ruth in Fort Worth. And no, I'm not a line dance teacher. Regarding Hinky, this is regarding Valentine's Day Nightmare, the most recent one. Regarding the phrase Hinky, I've never heard this before either until watching years ago the Harrison Ford movie The Fugitive, where some detectives call the situation hinky, and they mean it's just weird. But that's where I heard it. Second, I have a theory regarding this situation. I think that the lady decided that she was, in order to get her marriage on track and really take a good run back and commit to her marriage, that she wanted to come clean with her husband and the guy's wife, and just come clean about the affair. And when she told him she was going to do that, he killed her because he didn't want everybody to find out about the affair. That's my theory on why he killed her. And then, Matthew, regarding your giggling, you're such a juvenile. I'm laughing. I'm crying laughing at your giggling. Porky's the movie. You are so silly, and I love you. And then, just regarding dogs in general, they are just the most normal people in the whole room. And hello and hugs to Steve. I hope he's doing well. Take care, fellas, and thank you so much for the podcast.
Aw, that was very sweet, Ruth.
Ruth in Fort Worth.
That's actually a great theory. That is one that I hadn't really pondered. The fact that, maybe she was considering saying, like, she called him up and said, I have something we need to talk about. And she said, I'm going to tell everybody. And he killed her. That makes a lot of sense. A lot of sense.
I'm going to give Ruth the job of criminologist in that case.
Yeah, right. Because of that particular bit of deduction. Yeah. Well,
with a little bit of importing and exporting on the side.
There you go. What's she importing and exporting, Matthew?
She keeps it vague, Mike.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Just keep it vague. You know?
Just importer, exporter.
Yeah. What do you import? Oh, things. Lots of stuff.
I imported things and I exported things.
That's right. It's so
Sometimes
nice.
I export imported things.
Yeah, there you go. As long as those things aren't people, we don't need to be trafficking in human beings. There's enough of that happening.
God, dude, just look at you taking it fun dark, Mike. Jesus.
That's it for this week's voicemails. Again, you can leave us one at 1-877-327-5786 or 1-877-DARK-PTN. We'd love to hear from you, even if it is just to say hi and to tell us to go shit in our hats. If you're stumped for what to chat with us about, a quick story is welcome. Alrighty, we don't have any Donut Money donors or we don't have any Patreon or Donut Money donors this week, but that's okay. We're recording a couple episodes in a row, so we
got you last time.
We got you last time. So thank you. Well, actually, it's out of order because we recorded the other episode first, but we're releasing this one first. Anyway, you'll hear your shout out in the next episode. Thanks to all our patrons and Donut Money donors, past and present, for your generosity. It helps to keep the show going. You can become a patron of Dark Poutine at patreon.com/darkpoutine. For a one-time donation, you can send us donut money via PayPal using our email address, darkpoutinepodcast@gmail.com. If you don't already subscribe to the show, it would mean a lot if you did. You can easily find Dark Poutine on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. If you haven't gotten yours yet, my book, Murder, Madness, and Mayhem, is available to order via a link on the Dark Poutine website. And speaking of darkpoutine.com, please check it out for show notes and other cool stuff. We'd appreciate it if you took the time to give Dark Poutine a like or a follow on Facebook and Instagram. Most importantly, thank you for listening, and tell your friends about us. Word of mouth is a powerful thing. And that's it for this episode of Dark Poutine. Good job, Matthew. Great script. And until next time, don't forget to be a good egg and not a bad apple.
Bye, friend.
Bye.
You know the name.
I'm Special Agent Gibbs.
The most iconic special agent from TV's #1 global franchise.
NCIS.
This fall, uncover his mysterious past.
Let's go.
And witness the untold story of how he rose from rookie to hero to legend.
We're gonna get the guy who did this. You have my word.
Austin Stowell is
Special Agent Leroy Jeffo Gibbs.
NCIS Origins. New series Monday, October 14th on Global. Stream on Stack TV.